Right, that's on air and it's live. And I know some people from the class intend to join in, and hopefully they will turn up in the next couple of minutes online for the DH3133 Google Hangout this afternoon. It's windy here in Cork, so there may be a little bit of background noise from the wind. There may also be a little bit of glare from the sunlight because it's sunny as well as windy, which is quite remarkable here on the 9th of March. So what we're going to do, I'm waiting for people to catch up, and I'm going to be here for about half an hour. But what I want to do is review the discussion that we had this past week and pick up some of the points in it and then lead into next week's discussion. And even if people miss this because it's on YouTube and it's being archived, you'll be able to catch it up during the week, and the link will be shared on the class Blackboard page shortly after we finish here. So I'm just going to carry on and draw together some of the points from the discussion during the week, where we looked at two articles by Akun on the large Turkish historical database and Catherine Harbour's work on English music in London. And one of the things that came up in the discussion, which I thought was really important and very interesting, we may return to it if people come in, was the whole question of access, collaboration, access to a huge amount of resources on the internet, and what that means in terms of access to education and learning versus qualifications. And there's an interesting debate in the thread, which does make the point that there's an awful lot of scope for peer learning and for access to information. And the issue of learning guitar from YouTube came up several times. And there's a very nice guitar learning app turned up on the iPad App Store this week. And there is that versus the issue of qualifications and how you get qualifications. And it does, of course, for me, address the question of MOOCs. There are many, many MOOCs out there now, and they make college-level learning available to massive audiences, but they do depend very heavily on peer learning and peer assessment. So their value as qualifications is questionable. And they do require, several people in the discussion talked about the issues of universities having to adjust to the questions of access and providing more material online. And it does, of course, if that's going to be useful for people, there is a question of being able to discover it. And that is one of the things I want to, it picks up another, it relates to another topic that came up by a route which we'll come to, which is the question of standards. It arises from the Akun article to a certain extent, and also some of the points in Harbour about the need to create material that's reusable. Not to bury your material, your database, in a format that's not going to be usable down the road. The need to address questions of sustainability. And for the Akun article about the Turkish historical database, there is the question of how you gather materials, large variety of different materials in one database. The Catherine Harbour article talks also about following, for instance, Handel across a variety of different databases, not just musical, but also electoral, the poll database. And all of that requires the use of standards. And I did make the point that one of the things that we've had some exposure to standards in terms of structured query language very lightly, and also the TEI standard for text encoding. And in the course of the discussion, I did make the point that I suggested that someone should look at, that we should look at the Dublin Core as a tool. And let me just do this little trick here and go to this. I think this is where I want to go, and share this with everybody. And here we go. This should be screen sharing. I wanted to look at, I suggested looking at the Dublin Core. And the Dublin Core metadata on Wikipedia provides, as you can see, for a number of sort of core things that describe a resource: title, subject, creator, description. And they look like this as tags, and they get embedded in the header of a document, which allows you to identify it and establish some sort of standards. So there's a much longer list. The full list of metadata is longer and it's more interesting. And that sort of description, describing a resource in terms of clear metadata, and is important. We're familiar with, and somebody in the discussion referred to the Dewey Decimal System as a form of metadata about books. It tells us where in the library a particular book is shelved. So this is Dublin Core, and it's essentially metadata for the web. And that allows you to build, that is one of the nuts and bolts of the semantic web. And the semantic web, down at the bottom, everything has an identifier, tells you where it is. It's the web address. And a character set tells you what the character set is. And then there are metadata definitions in XML. And then there are frameworks for exchanging and identifying data, the resource definition framework. And that identifies stuff based on its relationship to other things. And it groups it potentially in taxonomies. A taxonomy is a way of structuring knowledge. The one that we're most familiar with, for example, is the sort of taxonomies of plants or animals. But you can have a taxonomy of anything, and it represents your ontological view of the world. And ontology is the study of the nature of reality. What is reality? So taxonomies allow you to group things in, and that allows you, for example, on YouTube to find all the videos relating to guitar playing. Although there's easier ways to do that, but for instance, complicated taxonomies will allow you to identify that with a more finer granularity. It will allow you to find tutorials relating to guitar playing at a particular level that's appropriate for where you are. And that sort of technology will allow us, going forward, to create very personalized learning experiences and to use digital tools to create very personalized learning experiences. Of course, a key part of that is also that people need to have skills for managing their own self-directed learning. And that's something that we don't perhaps deal with as explicitly as we should in a lot of our university courses. So those are a set of standards that group things together, and they make possible, this comes back to the Akun article, Europeana. Europeana, Akun started his work years ago, and it was a very ambitious project at the time, not technically impossible, but very time-consuming. Europeana is a collection of European cultural resources, and it's resources from all over a whole network of cultural centers, museums, archives, libraries all across Europe. And Europeana doesn't actually store any of this material itself. It doesn't even store the digital versions. It links to them. So it uses metadata and resource definitions and other things like that to build the semantic links between these. So that allows it to create these exhibitions. I haven't looked at this one before. I'm just going to take a wild guess here and open it out and open it in English. Hopefully it will load. Here we are. So one of the things I do in some of the MA classes on database design is I ask people to look at this and work out how you would design a database to hold this. But here, let's take football. I have very little interest in football, but this, how does this page work? Not all of these images are stored in Europeana. They belong elsewhere. But there's a set of, there's some descriptive text, and there's the image, and there's a header, which groups this together. And if you go through each item, this isn't quite as exciting because these are, in fact, all images. And images are easy to do. I'm going to do something that's a little bit risky here. I'm going to look at this. That's the Here we are. This is an exhibit, and you see it's a container. And actually, there's a bunch of rows and columns that it uses to format the stuff, and then it pulls in the different elements. The header file goes there. Oh, come back here. And there's the script for it. And then it actually generates this depending on what you click. There's the different themes. And somewhere in there, there's reference to, well, here's the text, right. So this is the piece of text that describes it, which is title small, is what it's called, theme. And somewhere here, page navigation, there's this wrapper. The story is all in the wrapper. And there's your heading 3. And what I'm looking for, excuse me, here it is. There's the exhibition. No, that's not it. That's the page navigation. Somewhere here, there's a reference. Link, center, middle, center, inner, to that picture. Oh, can't find it now. I'm not going to look for it. But that picture is not necessarily stored somewhere. There we are. It's an image tag. It's a picture of Bayern Music and Aston Villa. And here's the source, Europeana, and the display, but we don't have an indication of where the original is. Let me get rid of that and look at something more exciting in exhibitions. Let's find something that's physical. Okay, let's try this. This is a partner exhibition, so this is not even at Europeana, it's somewhere else, and Europeana's just stuck a link to it. And you pop out here, and there's a bunch of, it's an exhibition in the EU Screen portal. So this is a different portal where they've collected information from a number of places on screen media. And all of this, because this is all properly tagged with metadata, it can be pulled straight into Europeana. So that's roughly how this whole question of metadata and standards works and how it binds things together. And it's an important part of putting cultural heritage on the web. Omeka is a tool which is designed for creating online exhibitions. And the default setup for Omeka requires you to add the metadata to the exhibits as you go. Oh, well, I really want exhibits. And it groups it into a series of exhibits. And it only has one section on St. Patrick's Cathedral. And all of these are, again, a set of images that are grouped together, all of which, properly tagged with metadata, could be located and could be made open, for example, for inclusion in Europeana. So these standards, metadata, and the structure of the semantic web makes these things discoverable and findable. And that's one of the interesting things, I think, that came to me out of, and if we can come back here, out of the discussion. I had a couple of other things marked in the discussion. I talked about peer learning. The other thing that came up here somewhere in terms of the census data, and somebody made the issue about the census data, and there is this question about community approaches and the census, and the question of a time lapse about sensitive information and getting public personally identifying information coming into the public domain. For a census, I think I said this in class, the time lapse is normally 100 years. So census data is not usually released for 100 years. There is an ethics question, of course, in terms of the release of personally identifying information. When it was, people did not intend the information to become public. And that's why there's a 100-year block on the census, and that's why the Bureau of Military History documents were not released till everybody who given a statement in them was dead. But it does raise also some questions of ethics and research ethics and how you handle research material, how we handle research material in history. And also, of course, that bears on the general question of how personally identifying information on the internet is handled. And that's an important consideration, which comes out of this discussion. And I see I've got 3 people from the class looking in. I had 4, but somebody dropped off. I guess somehow or other you're hooked in and viewing it passively rather than actively joining the Hangout. There's a way to do that. If you go into Google Plus and join the event that way, you'll then show up on the little screen at the side and in fact, if there's multiple people, I'll have row little pictures across the side, and I can click on people and bring them in. And we can also hear people, and that works on quite a variety of things. So maybe next week we'll have a go at that and try and get some people to actually get into the Google Hangout. And if people want to email me between now and then, I'll point you to the help files and the downloads that are necessary to make that work. We're back up to 4, which is great. And there's group chat that works on the side for people who are on the Google Hangout app. You can actually do that. And at the risk of embarrassment, I'm going to show you, once I load Google Effects, that there's all sorts of funny things you can do in Google. If I can get this to work. Nope, I can't. Okay, fine. But you can put funny hats on people if you really want to. But what I more want to talk about as well is, yes, where this leads to, this ethics issue and research ethics, because it's not just about personally identifying information and the way in which the internet has changed the boundary between public and private. And it used to be that we had a different conception of public and private space in the 1700s. We didn't have much conception of private space, indeed, in the 1700s, and a great deal of the history of architecture and buildings was built around the whole question of the private space of people who control the buildings. If you look at, the Tudor palaces in England, and from the Victorian era onwards, from the 1830s onwards, we acquired a much more strict definition of public and private spaces and behaviors, which now the internet has essentially demolished, or forced us to have a radical reevaluation of public and private space and what is the appropriate way to handle private information about people in the past, as well as in contemporary research and disciplines like politics. But there's another area of research ethics in terms of historical debate, which is a broader one. And it's one of the reasons why I've picked 2 readings about controversies for next week, and one out of interest about quantification. The one that I've put up out of interest about quantification for next week is about how Electronic Arts, the gaming company, create player ratings in their Madden EA game. Let me just, cameraman, one of these icons. This is the screen share icon, and I want to screen share this and hit the share button. Here we go, present this to everyone. And I can then go out to this. Everybody knows I put the assessment portfolio template up there, I hope. Oh yes, here we are. Here's the controversy folder. And there's 3 readings. One is how the ratings are constructed for Madden, the Madden football game, which looks at how you actually reduce real-world events to a set of statistics and a set of numbers, and the sort of compromises that are made in doing that. So it's the same sort of compromises that are made when you digitize a set of census returns, or when you turn, a set of things. And we saw these discussed in the Durham Visitation article about and how they reduced things like the number of dissenters in a particular parish to a statistic, to a single. They could then do statistics on them. So it's moderately interesting in that respect. The other two, one is a review by Gutman of Fogel and Engerman's Time on the Cross, which was a very controversial book that used a great deal of very complicated statistical methodology, which could only be done on computer, to reanalyze the conventional picture of slavery in the antebellum South, in the South in America before the Civil War, and suggested very controversially that the institution of slavery was not as unpleasant as the conventional view had it. And that was based on a limited range of sources. And there's the whole question of survivability of sources, which some people raised in the discussion this week. How did the sources that they use come to be the ones that survived? And it was also based on then reducing the information in those sources to numbers which could be crunched in a computer at a time when historians in general were not computer literate and were not statistically literate. So it conducted the research in a way that was not accessible to criticism by the average person. The other piece is a review by Tad Allen of IBM and the Holocaust, which I've mentioned in class once or twice, which was the book by Edwin Black about the use of census tools, punch card reader-based census analysis in Europe in the 1930s and 40s. Almost every European country had taken up the IBM punch card technology for its census, and how that technology allowed countries to pull out information from the census and to locate, particularly allowed the Nazis to locate the Jewish population of various countries. And so there are several arguments there. One is that the technology was central to facilitating the Holocaust, that mass data processing is a fundamental feature of modernity. And in this case, it made it possible for the Nazis to locate the Jews, but obviously it now makes it possible for all sorts of agencies to locate people based on the relationships and the information that they pull out. So it touches on this very fundamental relationship between technology, surveillance, and the modern age, and how much we know about people and the sort of conclusions we can draw. And it's very similar, for example, to the questions, well, we know a lot less about the mob in the French Revolution. But we have to try and form conclusions based on people's motivations in the past and the motivations of the common people, based on a limited set of information. We're now living in a society where there's a lot more information, but the problem of assessing that information and trying to understand mentalities, mindsets behind it is important. The other question, of course, which was dealt with in the book, was the question of profit and damage. And there the historical evidence was used to support a legal action. And that raises questions not just about history and memory, but also about the use of historical evidence and how our contemporary tools for analyzing historical evidence allow us to form maybe very different views of the past, or suggest or argue for actions in the present to deal with issues that arose in the past. So it's a complicated issue. The review, the Tad Allen review, as well as Gutman's review of Fogel and Engerman, barely touch the controversies that arise about both of those cases. But they are very interesting. There are other controversies in history. I mentioned Lawrence Stone and the English, the decline of the English aristocracy, but that's quite far back in the dim and distant past. The Fogel and Engerman and the Edwin Black books are both much closer to the present, and they cut to issues which have much more contemporary relevance. So those are the readings for next week. Next week is, of course, St. Patrick's weekend. Tuesday is St. Patrick's Day, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to do our class online in this format again. Next Monday at 4 o'clock, I'll set it up to run a little bit longer, and we'll see if we can get a little bit more interaction going. But thank you to those of you who turned up virtually to view the class this afternoon. And thank you to the others who will no doubt pick it up during the week. And hopefully we will all meet again here virtually next Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock. I will be at home on a very suspect internet connection. In the meantime, email me if you have any questions or issues, and we'll keep in touch. So have a nice day, and thank you for being here. Next week, is it too much of a cliche to say same bat time, same bat channel?